Українське незалежне радіо.
Today on Ukraine Watch, from Ukraine's capital in Kyiv, I'm joined by foreign policy and security expert Alexander Khara, former official with Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council and currently a fellow at the Center for Defense Strategies. Alexander, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Hello, Danylo. Pleasure to be with you.
So I'm really interested to talk to you about what's going on at Ukraine's border, but I wanted to start with something that caught my attention in the Russian press yesterday. There were comments by President Vladimir Putin at a press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron about the agreement referred to as the Minsk Agreement. In 2015, it was an agreement between former President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and Vladimir Putin. That was a ceasefire that I think has been criticized by current Ukrainian President Zelensky as having some conditions that are difficult for Ukraine to concede with and implement. The comments translated from Russian roughly were something along the lines of, like it or not, take it, my beauty. Now, there's been a lot of rhetoric, obviously, and many indications in the press and from intelligence sources in the United States that a invasion by Russia of Ukraine is imminent. But I got to say, this seems to me, and I'm a layperson, like it would be a very difficult war for Vladimir Putin. Ukraine is roughly the size of the state of Texas. It's got a population that's hostile to the Kremlin. The West is talking about crippling sanctions, and invasion is one thing, but maintaining an occupation of a hostile territory seems like it would be not only costly, but difficult to sustain. Alexander, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that Putin is going to go through with this? And will he be able to meet his objectives with such a difficult prospect of war?
Okay, thank you. May I begin with just a bit correcting your words? You said Minsk agreements signed by the president of Ukraine. It's not right. We call them arrangements because it's not a legally binding document for Ukraine. It's a political statement, a political agreement between Ukraine, Russia, and OSCE. But Russia is trying to push the narratives that all those things are about Ukrainians or the Kievan side or Kiev regime, as they say, and those people from Donetsk and Lugansk as if they were a separate entity or they had any agency at all. So we understand they are Russian proxies, and they are fighting for the aim of Russia, not for to fulfill aims of Russia, not to be independent or autonomous or to cede to Russia. Secondly, it was signed by the former president of Ukraine, Mr. Kuchma. So according to the Ukrainian law on international agreements, and there is an international convention on that matter, it's not a legally binding documents. It's null and void because it violated Ukrainian domestic procedures, how international treaties should be prepared and signed and then implemented into the Ukrainian legislation. So that's why we should talk about arrangements, accords, but not agreements. When we are talking about Mr. Putin, it's sort of his he loves to put some quotes from the gangster world. For some reason, I don't know, even though he is representing one of the biggest countries on earth, and they claim they have the separate civilization, the Russian civilization with Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and others, but he tends to use the slang of the bottom of society. And actually, he was manipulating with a lot of facts in his press conference with Mr. Macron. And actually, Mr. Macron seemed to be not comfortable of, let's say, returning back and correcting Mr. Putin's lies. For example, Mr. Macron agreed that those arrangements were signed and that we need to implement them, even though he said that they were signed when there was no pressure on Ukraine with a lot of arms and soldiers on our border. And actually, two of these Minsk arrangements were signed after Ukrainian military were defeated by the Russian regular forces in Ilovaisk and Debaltseve. Those arrangements were a result of our defeat, and that's why Mr. Macron was wrong. He should have known this and corrected it. There are some other things like lies that NATO is threatening Russia, and that's why Russia is conducting these drills on their own territory of Russia. I mean, then on Belarusian territory. And then on occupied territories as well. I mean, Transnistria, it's a territory of Moldova, and in Crimea, which is territory of Ukraine. And I do not mention the occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk as well. So he's manipulating, he's putting pressure, he's trying to use the leverage that he has against Ukraine and Europe in general. He has some strategic goals with regard to Ukraine, like getting back to the sphere of influence. And he is trying to push this idea that either Ukraine should refuse its goal to become a member of NATO, or the West should refuse to accept Ukrainian bid for NATO. It's one of the strategic goals.
Mm-hmm. It seemed to you, Alexander, that reaching that goal would be much more costly with either a ground or sea invasion, actual boots on the ground in Ukraine, as opposed to maybe what's traditionally in Putin's playbook, which is sowing discord, chaos, and that sort of thing. It seems like if he were to go through with an invasion, although all the indications, the troops and the equipment on the ground, the rhetoric coming from both sides seem like, from the perspective of us in the West, that this is going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's go back to 2008, when Ukraine and Georgia were refused to get membership action plan at the Bucharest summit. At that time, Germany and France actually blocked our bid for this document, and this document would prove that we are a candidate for the membership. So instead, there was a political statement that Georgia and Ukraine are going to be a member of NATO in some distant future. So Putin received assurances from Germany and France that it's not going to happen soon. And it was sort of in Moscow, it was a reading of such a statement that it's green light for invasion. And just in a couple of months, he invaded Georgia, and he occupied bits of territory. I believe it's something like 15% of the Georgian territory, and Georgia is quite a small state. After the Revolution of Dignity of 2014, he decided that this vacuum of power in Kiev is quite a comfortable time to annex a bit of Ukrainian territories, and certainly Crimea was the first one. And he managed to do this with not a lot of blood. Even though Russians are saying that not a single bullet was shot, it's wrong. At least two Ukrainians, one colonel and one Crimean Tatar, were killed during this operation. And it was not a sort of a referendum of local people who wanted to join Russia, but it was organized and staged occupation. And actually, we can bring a parallel with occupation of the Baltic states. So Estonia in 1939, in the beginning of 40s, was annexed in the same manner. There was a fake election of the fake communists that were brought from Moscow, and then was let's say, announcement of the creation of Estonian Social Republic, and then this faked parliament voted to join the Soviet Union. So we have the same, let's say, algorithm implemented in Crimea. And then they were trying to shake in the, let's say, Ukrainian position in the southern and eastern territories, in the oblasts, and they managed to do it in Luhansk and Donetsk. But they failed to do this in Kharkiv, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, and some other regions. So they
failed Novorossiya Project.
Yeah, the whole idea of Novorossiya Project is to cut Kiev from the sea, because it's impossible to imagine Ukraine or flourishing Ukraine or secure Ukraine without access to the Black Sea, and certainly via Black Sea to the whole world. So the whole idea was just to cut all those Russian-speaking territories. And actually, I should say I'm originally from Donetsk. It's the stronghold of pro-Russian support. I'm not Ukrainian by origin. I'm Greek. I'm ethnic Greek. I'm Russian speaker. I'm Orthodox. But it doesn't mean that I want my people, my children to live in the Russian world. Vice versa. I don't want the Russian world to be imposed on Ukraine. And a lot of Russian speakers are fighting Russia still in the trenches of Donbass. It's not just the issue of ethnicity, of language or religion. No, it's about political identity and the willingness to live in a free country and be a part of civilized world rather than the Russian world. So that's why he failed then. And from that period of time, he was strengthening the, let's say, his grip of Ukraine by injecting regular forces in so-called Donetsk and Lugansk army corps. And they are part of the Russian military. So the center is on the Russian mainland, and they are operating all those soldiers of so-called republics. Up to
there, and I'm sorry, but you bring up an interesting point. This is not a civil war that's going on in Ukraine.
Not at all. It's not at all. It just
not sectarian war either. It's not like other sectarian type of wars in the past. You're mentioning that Russian speakers and maybe even ethnic Russians are volunteering to fight and die to protect Ukrainian territory against Russian forces, and that the occupying forces in the so-called breakaway republics in the Donbass are really not breakaway republics at all, but rather Russian proxies.
Yeah, you're completely right. You just as I said, I'm ethnic Greek, and we have a Greek minority in Donetsk and Mariupol and in between, and part of our villages are occupied by Russia at the moment. So it just because Ukraine became independent, we had an opportunity to flourish. I mean, in terms of our language, our culture, in other rights, and certainly if you have a look at how other ethnic minorities live in Russia, and including Greek ones, certainly we should not compare. And it one was the reason why all ethnic minorities, and especially in Donbass, because it's a multinational region, it's predominantly Russian speaking, but we have villages, Bulgarians, Serbians, even Ukrainian Koreans we have in Donetsk. So the whole ethnic, let's say, fabric of Ukraine is not compatible with something that Russia is building. And if you're talking about Maidan Revolution, Euromaidan, and then Revolution of Dignity, because we need to separate the things. On Maidan, they were.
You're talking about in 2014, around the time of the annexation of Crimea, or before that, and the popular protests that essentially led to Viktor Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine, fleeing.
You're right. The beginning was the students went on Maidan because they protested Mr. Yanukovych refusing to sign the association agreement with the European Union, and they were just a bunch of people protesting against it. It was not a lot of people on Maidan, but when they were encircled by riot police and severely beaten, all Kievans and a lot of representatives of other regions came to Maidan, because it was not about European Union or association agreement. It was about the way which Yanukovych chose for our country, the Russian way, that there is no freedom of thought, of speech, of free elections and other things. And certainly if we agreed on such terms, the next day someone else could be beaten or killed elsewhere in Ukraine. So a lot of people went not just because they wanted to be members of European Union or whatever, but they wanted to protect Ukraine from falling in the Russian way and into Russian sphere of influence. And it was about revolution of dignity, about dignity. So on Maidan, there were different people of any ethnicities. We had Ukrainians, Russians, Greeks, Jews, Armenians, and actually symbolic that the first two gentlemen who fought from the riot police bullets were of Belarusian and Armenian origin. They were not ethnic Ukrainians. So it shows how this revolution about identity, political identity, rather than ethnic or religious identity. The only group that was not presented or was pushed out of Maidan, it was the leftists. It were communists and socialists, because they are traditionally pro-Russian, and they were not happy with Lenin being brought down near Bessarabska Ploshchad Square. So it's not about ethnicity; it's about Ukrainian political nation defending its right to be in dignity, to be a member of the Western civilization, not the Russian world or the let's say these Eastern autocracies. So Putin was fueling this conflict on Donbass, pretending that they are just mediators and all locals are fighting for their rights. And actually, if you have a look at the first leaders of so-called republics, they were Russian citizens and Russian FSB, I mean, secret police operatives. They were not representatives of the local elites. And in Donetsk, we had residents of the...
It wasn't real. It wasn't an actual... There weren't actual grievances by Ukrainian citizens being brought against some kind of tyrannical government, but rather more like a false flag operation.
Oh, that's right. We have Mr. Akhmetov, who is the richest guy in Ukraine, and his stronghold in Donetsk and in Donetsk region in general. So why on earth some Russian citizens with no relation to Ukraine in general were heading the Donetsk People's Republic rather than someone from the encirclement of Mr. Akhmetov or Mr. Yanukovych, I would say. So it was just a fake entity, the state-led that the Russians are trying to portray it as a separatist entity, which is not. So the whole idea was to have this Trojan horse, as we call it in Ukraine, to inject into our political and legal space, and to have ability to undermine Ukrainian, let's say, decision-making process with regard to the domestic and foreign policy issues. So they wanted to control the whole of Ukraine via those proxy forces. And Mr. Poroshenko, the previous president, and Mr. Zelensky refused to follow this logic. They refused, and still, and I hope they will be not changing. I mean, the President Zelensky will not going to change the position of Ukraine, that we are not going to talk to the Russian proxies as they have any agency. No. Secondly, we could not begin any political discussions and the elections on those territories before the security guarantees are implemented. I mean, the ceasefire, the then withdrawal of the heavy armament and troops from the front lines, and then the presence and the, let's say, ability to monitor all those processes by the OSCE, the SMM, which is the special monitoring mission. And after that, we can talk about political settlement, and certainly this political settlement should not be in such a way, should not be done in such a way to damage Ukrainian constitution, the legal order, and democratic procedures. And we are against a lot of things that the Russians are trying to impose on us. But talking about the reason why Russia is escalating now. There were several factors in Ukraine, in Europe, in the United States, and certainly in Russia. In Ukraine, President Zelensky and the National Security Defense Council just stripped licenses and actually closed down several pro-Russian media channels in Ukraine. Then Mr. Medvedchuk, who is the Ukrainian national, but he is godfather of one of the childs of Mr. Putin. They have close relations. And he was sort of a mediator or fixer between Ukraine and Russian political elites. And he was the guy who has a long record of bringing down Ukrainian interests and bringing Ukraine closer to Russia. He was one of those, after all sorts of constitutional changes in 2004, when the Orange Revolution began. And he was a shady dealer with gas, oil, and some other things with Russia, enriching himself but selling Ukraine. So now he's in court defending himself, and he's not making all those things that he used to. And it was actually so important that our government has done such a thing, because Putin lost control over the minds of Ukrainians via propaganda channels, and ability to influence the politics and the let's say decision-making process in the highest offices of this country, because Mr. Medvedchuk is under investigation and in court. So that's why the only tool available for Putin is the threat of use of force and use of force. And that's why we believe it was one of the reasons he began this escalation. But there are some other aspects, like the United States. And you know that Ukraine is in actually one of the domestic factors of American politics. Ukraine caused one of the impeachment trials of Mr. Trump. And nowadays, the Republicans are competing with Democrats, who is the best defender of Ukraine and who is the most harsh with regard to Russia. So that's why Mr. Putin decided that there is a possibility and the narrow window of opportunity for him to have this great deal, or whatever you call it, between the United States and Russia on expense of Ukraine and other European states. And there is only possibility to have such a deal before Democrats are going to lose control over the Congress. I'm following Good Judgment Project. It's a crowdfunding of a crowd. Let's say they're asking crowd about political and other things, and it happened to be that sometimes the number of people and ordinary people are judging something in the same way. I mean, in the same way of accuracy as experts. So they're saying that Democrats are going to lose both Senate and the House. And that's why Putin needed to do this as soon as possible. And certainly we know that Mr. Biden was directing his government and his apparatus towards the competition with China, and Russia was not on his agenda before Putin decided to bring this to bring his attention to Russia in April, when he amassed a lot of troops and weaponry on our borders, and he received
the sanctions. He waived the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, allowing it to be completed. That's the pipeline that bypasses Ukraine and goes directly to Germany. It seems,
yeah.
I've been pleasantly surprised. It seems to me that any politicians of consequence in the United States, I'm not talking so much about the House of Representatives, but rather the Senate, where treaties are ratified and so forth, and where actions of the president have to be reviewed as well when it comes to foreign intervention. I've been pleasantly surprised that it seems like politicians of consequence on both sides of the aisle in the United States have been supportive of Ukraine. And also it seems that Putin's actions have sort of solidified the West against him. The thing that still sort of pops up in my mind is we have clearly, I mean, I think you've laid it out, there's a values-based argument of why to support Ukraine. It's a democratic country. It's part of the democratic, liberal democracy world. But what would you say to Americans or people in the West who might think, is it worth it to challenge Russia? Can we find peace by just conceding, or what's the other argument here? What's the practical side of this?
First of all, you should have a look at the American history. The Americans were reluctant to interfere on early stages, but they were dragged into the First and Second World War. So a lot of Americans lost their lives saving Europe and the whole free world from Nazi and from imperial fighting. So it's something like that. Secondly, it's not just Ukraine that Putin wants. There is a so-called Primacol Doctrine. Primacol was once a Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia and Prime Minister. So he formulated the doctrine that Russia is interested in multiple world, meaning that it's not just United States who is running the world, but some other actors like China and Russia. So in the Russian view, there should be three great powers. Secondly, Russia needs to regain control over the former Soviet republics, and especially Belarus and Ukraine. They need Ukraine and Belarus for various reasons, from demographic, and Russia is just 140 million people living there with a lot of not Slavic origin, and a lot of people do not speak Russian, or they are Muslim or Buddhist, not Christians. So Ukrainians are pretty let's say a valuable asset for Russia to have. There is the concept of strategic debt, because they need to have this sort of a buffer between Russia and Western countries, and so on. And certainly, without resources of Ukraine, it's not possible to strengthen Russian economy and Russian military and Russian, let's say, Russia. We still have a lot of technological stuff, and especially in defense sphere. So they need this to be more stronger. And then they need us to use as a leverage against Europe in general and against the transatlantic unity. And we've been witnessing this recent weeks, how Russia was demanding security guarantees for itself and trying to widen this rift between Europeans and the Americans and Europeans. So if I return back to the Primacol Doctrine, the third point is to stop NATO or to dismantle NATO. And fourth point is to leverage China against the United States. So the Russians are acting in such a, let's say, framework. They need Ukraine not just to stop and to have Ukraine as a price for something, but they need to advance their interests and advance their ability of influencing Europe and NATO. I mean, European alliance of NATO, and with the only aim just to dismantle it. Because it's not possible for Russia to regain its superpower status if they have neighboring European Union, which is a soft power, which is a strong economic power, a huge market. And if there is NATO, and certainly the United States as the pillar of NATO. So that's why they're using Ukraine against the Europeans in this sense, and I believe it's not in interest of the United States to lose the strongest alliance, and especially if you're talking about possible conflict or competition with China. It's much better to have Europe united, free and at peace as an asset of the United States, rather than fragmented or aligned with China or with Russia or whatever. So that's why there are a lot of strategic arguments that goes beyond the value-based approach that Ukrainians are struggling for freedom. They are actually, it's one of the things that we are not happy with. A lot of leftists, liberals in Europe and in the United States are reluctant to support Ukraine, and they are so sympathetic to Russia. we can describe what's going on between Ukraine and Russia as an anti-colonial war. Because Ukraine was a part of Russian Empire and then Soviet Union, and it was a de facto colony of Russia. So I'm just surprised why all those leftists across the world do not see this parallel, and they agreed on some Russian role, and Russia is sort of fighting the American empire, and that's why we need to support it, which is, well, I don't want to say bad words in air, but Russia is empire, and neo-imperial thinking is flourishing in Russia, and there is nothing left of leftists in Russian politics. It's ultra-right. It's militaristic, it's not conservative. If you have a look at the numbers, opinion polls and numbers in statistics, whether Russia making good in records like abortions or the alcoholism or drug addiction or other things, it's not going to be an example of a conservative country. And if you're talking about religious things, it's not. Religion is a tool of politics in Russia, and Russian Orthodox Church is a tool of foreign policy of Russia. They are trying to use it to undermine sovereignty of other countries, and we've seen it in Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukraine was granted the autonomous church by our mother church in Constantinople, which was absolutely amazing. We were dreaming about it for a long period of time. So there are a lot of things are intertwined. Political, cultural, language, and other things.
Yeah, I find it interesting. It's certainly concerning that traditionally there have been these sort of left voices who have been Russian apologists. And what's been really concerning to me too is in American media, at least, there are some right-wing popular pundits who have been openly siding with Russia. It seems counterintuitive that would happen, and it's strange that it's happening in this sort of politicized landscape. There's sort of this populism that's springing up not only in America but sort of all over the Western world, and maybe that's why Vladimir Putin saw his moment. He maybe saw some weakness or smelled blood in the water and thought this was his chance. But I also wanted to ask you what you thought of the idea. You were mentioning sort of self-preservation in a way of the Russian regime, and when Vladimir Putin or Russians see a free and democratic Ukraine with a market economy, and they look at Ukraine as somewhat to be a population of, well, in their view, they're Slavs, but in their view, maybe similar or the same country, even though it's not really true. It undermines the authoritarian kleptocratic regime that Putin has, because Russian citizens will see, hey, it's possible to live in a free country.
Well, it's a popular thesis in the West, but I do not share enthusiasm about it for several reasons. Just firstly, if you have a look at the Russian history, there was just a small period of time when there was a relative freedom in the country. I mean, during the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union, and now during this period of time. So democracy is not something that is really of value for majority of Russians. Secondly, democracy is about middle class, or those independent from the state. But if you have a look at the composition of the Russian economy, a majority of resources are controlled either directly by government or semi-governmental structures. So majority of Russians are from military or security apparatus or the civil servants, or they work for state corporations, or they are from small companies but work for the state corporations, and there are pensioners. So majority of them depend on the state budget, and state budget is controlled by Moscow, even though it's Russian Federation, but in reality it's unitarian state. It's more unitarian than unitarian Ukraine. So that's why the layer of those who are not dependent on the resource-based economy is so small and it's so widespreadly, let's say, spread across the Russian vast territories. So it's difficult for them to accumulate and to make some pressure to the central government and to demand for more freedom and for changes. And after 2014, Putin was squeezing all those liberals or all those free-minded people out of Russia. They are either in jail or drinking, because it's sort of escaping this hardship of this world, or they are just outside. And certainly I should mention some being killed, like Mr. Nemtsov and some others. So I do not believe that there is something that shows there is a possibility in Russia to change their mind. Then I'll bring a bit of numbers. Like Levada Center is one of the liberal opinion poll centers or sociological centers in Russia, and I have no doubt in their correct numbers. So 86% of the Russians still love that Russia annexed Ukrainian Crimea. Some 65 or 63% support Putin in his actions. But at the same time, the half of the Russians, 45 or so percent, are not happy with the direction Russia is going. And almost the same number are happy with this direction. So the Russians do not connect the dots between the annexation of Crimea, the war on Donbass, then, as a reaction of the West, sanctions imposed on Russia, and which undermined the economy and the well-being of each and every Russian, except of Putin and his cronies like Mr. Abramovich or Rottenberg, or those, as we called, the cooperative lake. They knew each other for several decades because they had dacha or villas nearby. So those guys are rich ones. They're making a lot of money. They're better off rather than feeling all those pressures from the West. So the Russians do not connect these dots between the actions of their government, they support or silently support. It doesn't matter whether you're voting for Mr. Putin and his fake United Russia Party, or you are just silently agree with what they are saying, and you are proud that your country is annexing territories of your brother nation, as they called us. Or you are threatening, or your government is threatening the United States to turn the United States into the radioactive ash. Or they are very proud of their military and especially nuclear forces. So it's something, I believe it's more to psychologists to consider whether it's normal thing or it's a sort of a trouble from the medical point of view. But I don't think it's going to work. And Putin is using this fear of the Russians that they can back to the 90s when there was no, let's say, stability, there were gangsters, there were no jobs, and there were no goods to buy. But in reality, they have these gangsters in form of National Guard and the FSB and riot police and others. And they have no jobs because they are losing jobs because they are dependent on the commodities, and when the prices on commodities were low, there were not enough money to carry on all those social programs. And certainly there is no freedom like it was in 90s because there is no single channel, TV channel in Russia independent from FSB, or even so-called liberal channels like Echo of Moscow are owned by Gazprom Media and some other newspapers that pretend to be independent. They are controlled by FSB. So it's an Orwellian world when TV is commanding and TV is forming reality. And so that's why I do not believe that the Russians would have a look at Ukraine, our successes, and would decide that they can make the same success in their own country. And certainly there are other divisions like national republics or Far East, where people are closer to Japan or China rather than to Europe. So they are not really interested in what's going on here. They see on their own eyes, with their own eyes, how China is successful and how China is advancing its influence in those regions, in Siberia. So I do not believe in the thing, but if it's helpful for the Americans to think in such a way, it's okay. I don't mind.
Well, so let's talk about the worst case scenario then. If Putin were to actually invade and try to occupy the territory of Ukraine, I see a threat to NATO, but I want to get your thoughts on this. What would the consequences of Russian troops on the border with, direct border with NATO have on Europe and the United States?
Well, we're just in the middle of the Russian military drills, and actually tomorrow, on the 10th of February, they are going to conduct nuclear drills as well. Recently, a couple of strategic bombers were landed or were patrolling and then landed in Belarus. Then a strategic interceptor with the hypersonic weapon was landed in Kaliningrad, which is a Russian enclave in the Baltic. So the Russians are going to use these nuclear drills. They postponed them because traditionally they've been holding them on autumn, but they decided to hold them in mid-February, March. And certainly it's a strong signal to the West that we are going to use nuclear threat, at least, if not nuclear arms and per se, if the West is going to do something and to support Ukraine. And actually, in 2014, when Russia was annexing Crimea, and after that Putin was talking to a journalist, he admitted that there were no little green men, they were Russian operators, and Russia put on a high alert its strategic nuclear forces. So the history repeats itself in this case. So it might be a sort of a signal, do not, let's say, support Ukraine, or you might have some big troubles. Secondly, there are a lot of conventional forces in Belarus making drills with Belarusian armed forces. And I should remind the listeners that Belarus is a union state, and it has been a union state for a couple of decades. They have joint force operations. They have joint let's say, committees between the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They see NATO as a threat to the national security of Belarus. And actually, what's interesting, in December last year, so-called president of Belarus, Mr. Lukashenko, and he is not recognized as a legitimate leader of the country because he forged election and he was killing and beating and torturing his citizens who raised against him in peaceful protest. So he launched a change to the constitution of Belarus, wiping out the clause that Belarus is non-nuclear state. So it means that he creates a legal ground, legal framework for Russia to deploy nuclear arms to Belarus, which would threaten first and foremost NATO countries, the Baltic countries, Poland, and the northern European countries. So it's direct threat.
Proliferation. We're talking about nuclear threat escalation.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, in 2014, right after Russia annexed Crimea and integrated into its legal space, the special units of the Russian Ministry of Defense and the General Chief of Staff were deployed to Crimea to restore the facilities built and used by the Soviet Union to storage nuclear arms. It's in Balaclava, which is one of the most picturesque places in Crimea, and Feodosia. So I believe that the Russians already deployed nuclear arms to Ukrainian Crimea. even they denied it. But from the other hand, Mr. Lavrov, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, said that since it's Russian territory, I mean Crimea, he has all rights to deploy all kind of weapons, including nuclear ones, and it does not possess as sort of a violation of international law, international agreements signed by Russia. So Russia is threatening the world with nuclear arms, and possibly, I don't know whether you have seen Putin talking about new generation nuclear missiles and other things. And in his presentation, one of these missiles were hitting something closer to Florida, I mean, in shape of Florida. So he is using nuclear blackmail against the West since 2014. And certainly, if there is invasion in Ukraine, and if there is a worst-case scenario with a lot of casualties on both sides, certainly on both sides, but so we take care first and foremost about Ukrainians, and it could be some 2, 3, or whatever million of refugees from Ukraine into the neighboring countries if Russia is capable of holding this territory and putting their boots on the ground. So it's going to, let's say, shake the European stability, and you know that all those refugees from Syria in 2015 and 16 that fled to the European countries, and particularly to Germany, undermined political stability in those countries. And Mrs. Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, lost a lot of points by accommodating all those in need on their territory. So it's going to repeat itself if Putin decides to go nuts and to invade Ukraine in full-fledged war. And certainly it's going to escalate because we have will to fight, and I'm not talking about just the government. And President Zelensky was saying that Ukraine is ready to defend itself. Our armed forces are ready to defend ourselves. Unfortunately, and because of the assistance of our foreign partners, first and foremost the United States, we have new arms like Javelin anti-tank missiles or NLAV from the United Kingdom. And we have a lot of other things that are going to turn this invasion to hell for Russians. And Ukrainian civil society is not going to just stand by and watch how the Russians openly invaded Ukraine. We have a lot of groups who are training now, I mean, just civilians with no military background, and they are conducting all those drills, the urban warfare or ambushes or whatever that they are up to defend our cities. So it's not going to be an easy walk for Russia. And all those factors, like our willingness to defend ourselves, the readiness of our armed forces, we have 260,000 strong armed forces. We have something like 400,000 of those Ukrainians who went through the conflict in east of Ukraine. So they know how to fight the Russians, and they have no sentiments. So they will be killing whatever nationality or language they speak if they cross our border. And we have a lot of Ukrainians, just ordinary Ukrainians, who are preparing themselves for this war and for this fight. So that's why, even though the Russians outnumber, outgunned us, but they are not going to have an easy walk into Ukraine.
So is that the key, you think, to sort of stemming or resisting Putin's aggression is not only the threat of sanctions, but a show of force?
Sure, just the only thing Putin understands is force, and the borders of the Russian world ends where they just have a punch into their chin, and certainly it happened. Unfortunately, it happened near Donetsk and Lugansk, not in Crimea. We had an opportunity to stop them there. But at that time, there was a vacuum of power in Kiev. There was not legitimate, let's say, President Yanukovych fled the country, and we had some political tensions and those people who were then, let's say, headed Ukraine for some time before elections. At that time, there was a political vacuum, and the Russians has been preparing for such a thing for a long period of time. I should remind you that the Russians, let's say, questioned Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity ever since 1991. And in 1992, 1993, and 4, they've been trying to annex Crimea via their proxies. It was an autonomous republic, and there was pro-Russian and actual Russian citizen elected as a president of the republic, and he was trying to push forward this annexation. At that time, fortunately, we had pretty capable security service and the military, so they just seized an opportunity to stop this so-called separatist movement and kill it in the beginning. But unfortunately, in 2014, we were in a bit different shape and position, and we lost control over Crimea. And then there was let's say, popular uprisal of ordinary Ukrainians who saw that the government was not able to do something with Crimea, and they decided that the Russians could repeat in Donetsk, Lugansk, and other regions, and so they took arms and they were defending Ukraine by the force of arms. And actually, it's just the Russians usually refer to the events of the 2nd of May in Odessa. If you remember, there was an understanding between the pro-Ukrainian and the Russians, and actually Russian citizens as well, trying to shake the governmental authority in Odessa and to capture Odessa, actually, to annex Odessa in such a way. But actually, when those pro-Russians were killed in trade union building, which is strategy for sure, but it was a sort of a signal or sign for all Odessites that the Russians are preparing to convert Odessa into Donetsk and Lugansk in this term. I mean, the occupied territory with no rules, with brutal force being applied to anyone who does not agree with those with arms and with this double-headed eagle on their in signature. So Odessa was saved with the lives of those pro-Russians who were killed there. It's a pity to say, but I believe it's a much more acceptable price than we've seen and we paid in Donetsk, Lugansk. 14,000 of Ukrainians has been killed during this war that Russia is waging against Ukraine.
Well, Alexander, I really thank you for joining us today on Ukraine Watch.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's been very enlightening, and I really appreciate hearing your opinions and your thoughts on this crisis. I hope it starts to warm up in Kyiv in the next few months, and that it remains peaceful.
I hope so, but we need to be prepared, and I believe that peace through strength is the only right way how to deal with Russia.
Well, thank you again, Alexander.
Thank you.
Українське незалежне радіо.